Hello. I am not here because I am somewhere else. And that somewhere else is my house with my sick kid. Am I making you uncomfortable? Kind of making me uncomfortable. I will just give my lecture from back here as it makes my head look like it's super small. Kruger coming at ya. Anyway, obviously I'm not here. And while this might make you uncomfortable, you know what's going to make you very comfortable? Some notes on Puritans. Face keeps doing weird stuff. Anyway, if you could open up your notebooks, and the way this is going to work is the sub is going to point you to some notes. You're going to copy them down, each slide in the PowerPoint. Then they're going to push pause on this, and then they'll push play. And I will talk to you a little bit as a space alien with a really large head and a really small nose. Whoa. Whoa. Sorry, I'm enjoying this a bit too much. Anyway, slide 1, which is slide 4, we get the Puritan timeline. Okay, now, I'm assuming that you've covered a lot of this in history class, but the main thing that I want you to kind of take a look at are the dates at the bottom. So 1620, Mayflower Pilgrims land at Plymouth Rock, and then 1692, the Salem Witch Trials. Okay, so the play we're going to be reading, The Crucible, takes place around 1692, and it's not history, but it's based on history. So a lot of the people in that play are either people who did live, or kind of like author Arthur Miller kind of combined a number of different real historical people into one character for the purposes of the play. He did make a lot of changes between what actually happened in history and what happened in the play to make the play go better, but we'll be kind of looking at, I've got a good handout for you that kind of explores those differences. But anyway, 1620, Puritans were not overly happy people. Okay, and basically at that point you were either praying, or you were working, or you were doing something sinful. Okay, and so that has a couple advantages. One, I mean, that it keeps people religious, but two, if you're working to ensure the success of your colony and ensure that people get to survive, if everyone is either working or praying, then everyone's kind of pulling in the same direction and working towards the same goal. If you remember from history class, Jamestown, a earlier colony, the primary focus of that was money. They wanted to make as much money as they could. There was none of the religious fervor involved in it, and so people weren't always on the same page. That colony ended up dying out. That's kind of a simplistic view of it, but anyway, back to the Puritans. They were also very judgmental people who were kind of always watching over each other. Okay, so the difference between 1620 and 1692 is that the colony's been around for quite a while, a couple generations, and so things are a lot more settled, and as with people your age, when things get to be a bit too strict, people like to kind of push back a little bit. Okay, and so the Puritans at this time, once we get to 1692, had been around a while, and they were looking for a bit more freedom and to rebel a little bit more. So, opening scene of the play, all the girls in the town sneak out into the woods late at night. And I don't know if you've ever done like a Ouija board or something. Ouija board is it's a game board, and it's got all the letters and all the numbers, and you ask it a question, and then you've got a little marker piece with like a little glass disc in the middle, and you hold your hands on one side of it, and then like that, pretend you're the marker piece, and I'm playing Ouija board on you. That's really weird. Anyway, and then your friend's on the other side, and you ask it a question, and then in theory, supposedly what happens is the spirits move the board around, move the piece around, spell out words. But really what happens is whoever's more of a jerk, you or your friend, goes around and spells out naughty words. So anyway, the girls go out in the woods late at night to cast some love spells. They want the boys who like them to like them back. Okay, which is kind of the setup for the play. Okay, so we'll get more into that as we get into the play, but I'll ask the sub to push pause right now as I go on to next slide. What the Puritans believed. So, one of the things we'll be talking about throughout this whole term, and next try for that matter, is the way that literature of America both kind of influences the values of America and reflects the values of America. So, some of the values we'll be talking about going way back to the beginning of the country still kind of show up today. And when you look at the little handout, why do Americans act like that? You'll see some of these values that kind of still transcend today. And when people talk about what it means to be American, some of those things going way back to the beginning of the country still stick around. Some of them go away, and we'll be talking about how that works too. But so first, religion's a personal inner experience. So each person is responsible. You've heard the term self-reliance, and each individual has personal responsibility. Each person's responsible for their own salvation. Now I realize this stuff's pretty religious-y. I want to be very clear that I'm not trying to influence your beliefs, ideals, or ideologies. You can believe or not believe in whatever you want to or not want to. It's none of my business, no concern. But the first couple of kind of time periods we'll be looking at contain quite a bit of religious stuff. As we move forward into near the end of this term and into next term, we move away from that. So again, believe or don't believe in whatever you want. Puritans also were fairly judgmental, and they believed that most people who were born were going to hell. There was a select few people who were chosen to go to heaven, and they were the good people. Generally, those were the people who ran the community, the ministers and the government officials. The only people who were saved were the chosen few saved through the grace of God. Now, this is kind of where religion and economics overlap a little bit, because the way you demonstrated to others that you had this grace of God, and therefore were going to heaven, was through hard work and worldly success. So you can see that if people want to demonstrate that they're religious, they work hard and then earn a lot of money and do quite well for themselves. And so it matches up in terms of helping the economy of the colony going, and also keeps people religious in nature. And finally, education is essential to read the Word of God, because each person is responsible for their own religious beliefs and their own whatever happens to them in the afterlife. Each person needs to be able to read so that they can study and learn the Bible for themselves. Okay, we'll pause there. Okay, the next slide, grace, the Puritan ideal. Now, the grace was the way that you determined who was going to hell and who was going to heaven. It's the only way you knew that you were going to heaven. Now, grace isn't something you can necessarily prove, and in some cases it's only what you could feel as an intense emotion. We'll be looking at a few examples of actual Puritan literature. We'll be looking at a poem in the next day or two, and then part of a short sermon. And the religion that they practiced at that point was really severe. I mean, it was really kind of fire and brimstone, and meant to kind of terrify the people going to church into being more religious people. Also, the people who had grace were among the elect, okay, and the people who did not have this grace were going to hell. And so people were always trying to work hard and demonstrate that they had this grace to prove to others, because kind of your appearance and your reputation was really important to how people viewed you, and also whether they viewed you as going to heaven or not. So we'll stop there, and then I'll let you copy down the next slide. Okay, grace, the Puritan ideal. Just copy down the terms. The people who had grace, and you can see some of these terms, I think you'll see some of these terms in the Why Do Americans Act Like That? And even when you hear politicians talk today, terms like self-reliance. People, it's up to each individual to, you've heard the term, pull themselves up by their bootstraps. That's kind of where this comes from. Personal responsibility. Each person's responsible only for themselves and shouldn't be relying on others. Industriousness through hard work. You can demonstrate success. Temperance, not having too much of anything, and then keeping life very simple. One of the things that the movie does well is just gives you a little bit of a view of what Salem would have looked like at the time. And when you look at the houses of these people, you can see that they're very simplistically designed. Okay, it's just kind of wood houses. There's not a lot of pictures or ornamentation or decoration or anything really along those lines. Everything is very, very simple to keep things very religious in nature. So again, you can see how the values that they talk about there, which people would use to demonstrate that they are going to heaven, also kind of match up well with making sure that economically the group of people who are living there does quite well. So we'll stop there. Let's go on to the next slide. Puritan government. Puritan government was what's known as a theocracy. So theocracy is a government based on God, where the laws come from God, and therefore the rulers are chosen by God. So in theory, each individual had an equal covenant with God, and laws came from God as revealed by Scripture. The problem with this is, so if my classroom were to be a theocracy, that would mean that I would be chosen by God. And so if I accused you of cheating, you're not supposed to cheat because the laws against cheating come from God, and I'm selected by God to run this classroom. And so if I accuse you of cheating and you try to argue against me, in effect you're also arguing against God, which is a terribly difficult argument to win. And as we get into the crucible, you're going to see what happens with this, because anytime the judges or the ministers are challenged, basically they turn it around to you're challenging God and God's will on this, which is it's a tough argument to win. So in practice, in terms of theocratically elected governments, and there's still a few of these in the world today, most people just kind of give authority to the saintly elect, the people, because they're chosen by God, right? And conformity and obedience took precedence over individual rights. And so basically what you were asked to do is kind of just do what everyone else was doing. And what everyone else was doing was being very religious and praying and practicing and studying the Bible, and also working really hard and doing what you're told, because the people who are telling you what to do were chosen by God, right? So everyone's kind of doing the same thing and trying to act like everybody else, and also people are always kind of watching others, right? And so if you saw your neighbor was not coming to church, you would take note of that. And if it ever came up in an argument, and these types of things will come up as evidence in the witch trials in terms of why people are not religious or not doing what they're supposed to do, or why they're in big trouble, it's important. And so people's reputations were very, very important. And that's also going to come into play big time once we get into the play a little bit more. So I'll pause there. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, and it looks like that might be the end. Let's go to what happened to the Puritans. The Age of Faith gradually gave way to the Age of Reason. Our next time period in Transcendentalism is still very religiously based in nature, but it goes from a very judgmental form of Christianity to a much more accepting form of Christianity. So it's still pretty religiously based, but it moves away from most people going to hell to most people being seen as good, and through belief in oneself and never giving up and trying to be optimistic, each person can attain perfection. Okay, so I'll pause there and go to the last slide, the Puritan legacy. So these are the things which have been kind of, in terms of the values, which have gone from time period to time period. Individual rights and responsibilities, each person's responsible for themselves. Equality of individuals, literacy and education, and spiritual and worldly rewards for hard work. So again, you'll see some of terms like this in the Why Do Americans Act Like That kind of handout you're going to be looking at. And I think that's an interesting handout. So I'll have you, we'll finish up the notes here, and then I'll pause it while you take out the Why Do Americans Act Like That. Now, what I want you to do as you read this is, first of all, read through it, and then there's a little worksheet in the back that asks you to write down the 3 of those values which are most important to you. And I think that, I've had a lot of students do this activity, and a lot of teachers take a look at this, and I think that's a pretty accurate description of how kind of Americans view themselves and the things which are important to them. This is not a negative depiction of Americans and who they are, but you can kind of start to look at where those values came from and how some of them start to kind of match up with some of the notes we've taken and some of the things we'll be reading from this unit. Okay, so once you're done taking a read through that, you'll do a little bit of writing in terms of writing down what the 3 most important values and why they are, and then the one which would be least important to you. Okay, so tomorrow in class we'll be starting to talk Crucible a little bit more. We might be selecting roles for that play, and then we will go on from there. So I'll be back tomorrow. Thank you, bye.